Great. So thanks again for coming. This is the webinar on redirecting taxes to Black, Brown, and Indigenous resistance. My name is Sam Koplinka-Loehr, and it's great to be here with you today. This is a little bit of an outline of what we're going to go over today in this webinar. I'm going to try and keep it to about 30 minutes for the presentation, and then give everyone time for question and answer afterwards. Just as a disclaimer, this webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards for folks who had registered. So don't say anything that you don't want recorded, either your name or any other information that you wouldn't want disseminated. We really want to make sure that we're protecting people's privacy. Also, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a tax professional. The information that's in this webinar is not legal advice. So just to be upfront about that from the beginning. I want to talk a little bit about just myself and the organization that I work with, which is the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee. And we've been around for about 35 years supporting people who refuse to pay taxes to the federal government because it goes to war, it goes to the military, prisons, police, and different forms of oppression that are funded with our tax dollars. This is from the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee statement of purpose, which reads, "Through the redirection of our tax dollars, NUTRIC members contribute to the struggle for peace and justice for all." And that's really what we're going to be talking about on this webinar today. A little bit about myself. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I am an organizer with NUTRIC, and I also work with a few other organizations. I work with a Prisoner Solidarity Group that's actually based down in Louisiana. I support local struggles here in the city as well. So let's talk about the big picture of what this redirection effort is. The very basics of it is that this is about refusing to pay for the U.S. government systems of oppression, the wars on our streets and the wars at home, as well as the wars overseas, and also to redirect that money to resistance work, and particularly resistance that's led by Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, people who are directly targeted by the white supremacy that is our government. To touch on that a little bit more in depth, this is a brief presentation. We don't have time to get into all of the elements of institutional white supremacy. That would be a much longer presentation. But I just want to highlight a few pieces of how our government operates as a white supremacist organization. So over the past 15 years, we've seen the U.S. government lead multiple illegal wars that have murdered millions of people overseas, particularly Arab people, as well as the illegal locking up and incarceration of thousands of Muslims. And again, coming back into this country, not talking about bases overseas, but we are seeing some of the highest incarceration rates, particularly of Black and Brown and Indigenous people, anywhere in the world. The United States has the highest incarceration rate. Along that front, the U.S. government also refuses to recognize a lot of the native land and sovereignty issues for Native people in this country. And that is everything from breaking treaties to trying to build pipelines through Indigenous land. But the basic piece is the targeting of Indigenous people as well as refusing to recognize Indigenous sovereignty. When we're looking at the targeting of Black communities, we're thinking about the murders that are happening in the streets where police are killing Black people every single day. We're seeing targeting of Black organizations, going back to COINTELPRO and the FBI targeting the Black Panthers, the Civil Rights Movement, as well as today. The FBI, it's come out just in the past few months, has been doing widespread surveillance of the Black Lives Matter movement in cities across the country. And then what we're seeing in terms of our Latinx communities are the continual deportation. Under Obama, there was millions of folks from Latin America that were deported, as well as the incarceration as well. At the border, there are these huge prisons that are housing thousands and thousands of people, prison companies are making lots and lots of money off of the incarceration of Latinx people who are trying to come into this country predominantly because of U.S. policies in Latin America. So those are just some of the ways in which we think about how our government is a white supremacist organization. In terms of other resources, if you want to delve into this more, there are great resources out there that specifically are created and drafted by Black folks, brown folks, Indigenous people. If you look at the treaties of the land in your area, the treaties between the U.S. government or the states and the First Nations, the folks who were there at the time of colonization, and a lot of those treaties have been broken, but those are important things to learn. Also, in terms of other resources, there's a great documentary that just came out called 13th, which goes into mass incarceration, particularly targeting Black folks, and the ways in which that's manifesting today, as well as the way in which that has manifested generation and generation over in this country. So those are some resources to learn a little bit more about those elements. And white supremacy also operates in our organizing spaces. And this is the ways in which, even as a movement, as we're trying to dismantle these systems of oppression and challenge white supremacy at the federal level and in our communities, we're seeing how it's also operating in organizing. And it operates in a few different ways. One is white control of the narrative and co-optation. You know, this happened with Black Lives Matter, which was initiated and led by 3 Black queer women, and immediately there were attempts to co-opt the movement. And the attempts for especially white folks, white activists, who said all lives matter, and really tried to shape the narrative to really silence the voices of, in this case, Black queer women who had led this powerful and fierce movement for justice. So there's elements of white domination and taking over organizing spaces, and it also manifests in terms of funding, that white organizers have access to funding that Black, brown, Indigenous organizers don't have. Whether this is foundation support, whether this is donations from their communities, and having access to white wealth in ways that Black, brown, and Indigenous organizers don't have. And so what we're seeing in our organizing communities is that oftentimes Black organizers, I'm thinking about here in Philly particularly, are doing years and years of amazing, brilliant organizing that's unpaid. And you know, there's one group that I work with here in Philly, the Philly Real Justice Coalition, where a lot of the organizers have been doing this work for many, many years, and have never been paid for it. And that it's not the case with some of the white organizers who have access to lots of wealth. And so that's some of the ways, you know, there are many, many, many more, but some of the ways in which white supremacy operates in organizing spaces. Yeah. Another big one is the control of the narrative, and that, you know, if we think about the Women's March that just happened recently, one of the huge criticisms of the Women's March is that it focused predominantly on white women, and you know, there was a great counteraction that happened here in Philly, where Black women were saying, in response to the pussy hats, not all pussies are pink, and just that simple way in which a symbol for a march, you know, this idea of a pussy hat that was mostly pink hats, was enacting white supremacy in that space. And there's really needing to be supporting the Black women who are challenging that white supremacy and the ways in which that dominates the space. But that was not noticed and actually enacted in the organizing of the Women's March. So those are just some ways there, and there's many, many more, but I just wanted to touch briefly on how that really comes into our movements. So despite all of this, what we are seeing is a huge, huge, powerful resistance movement in our country right now that are refusing to be co-opted, that are led by Indigenous people, led by Black people, led by brown people, that are refusing to have white supremacy in their spaces, as well as standing fiercely against white supremacy in the world, that's seeking to oppress, disempower, and kill their communities. So I want to talk about some of those movements. And the first one is what's happening out at Standing Rock with the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. And for those who aren't familiar, my guess is that many people are familiar. But for those who aren't familiar, the Standing Rock Sioux Nation has been in a year-long battle with the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a project of Energy Transfer Partners that would build a 1,100-mile-long pipeline through the Midwest, and it would cross right through the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. And despite fierce opposition from the Standing Rock Sioux, the company has attempted to continue going forward with the project, cutting under hundreds of native sacred sites, cutting underneath the drinking water for millions of people. And the water protectors who are out at the Standing Rock Sioux Nation have been in this now year-long battle using direct action and grounded in prayer that has brought together hundreds of tribes from across the country and across the world in this fierce resistance and refusal to back down, a refusal to allow the white supremacist organizations, corporations, our country as a whole, to override their sovereignty. So here are some photos from Tom Jefferson, who's an amazing photographer who's been out at Standing Rock Nation over the past few months. And actually, for those who are interested in his work, he has a fundraiser right now to get more photo equipment because being in the field for months on end in the freezing conditions that were out on the Great Plains, oftentimes right in the face of police who were using tear gas and pepper spray and water cannons, he's trying to get more his equipment repaired. So if you want that link, I can send that out to folks to support his work. So these are photos of the resistance out there that faced pretty tremendous and brutal repression from many different police forces as well as the National Guard. And actually just the other day, there was a huge movement of police that forced an eviction of many different parts of the camps out there. So it's an ongoing struggle. And what we're talking about with these things in terms of our white supremacy and our government is not new. This is many folks following the inauguration of Trump, they feel like the veil has been lifted. And I think this is particularly true for white folks, where the veil has been lifted and they're able to perhaps see the white supremacist structures a little bit more clearly. And I want to just take a moment to talk about that, and that this is again not new. Under Obama, we saw millions of deportations, and yet, because Trump is now in power, there have been massive protests. And so what has changed? On the one hand, it's blatant. It's blatant racism. It's blatant xenophobia. And yet Obama was called the deporter-in-chief. And in terms of wars overseas that are targeting black and brown people, Obama had thousands of airstrikes, expanded drone warfare. So I say all this to really highlight that for those who are new to this movement, we have been resisting for a very long time, and especially black, brown, indigenous people have been resisting for generations and generations. And this struggle is not new. Yes, Trump is perhaps escalating violence, perhaps escalating overt policies of oppression, and yet this is the very foundation of our country, has been built on slavery, built on genocide, built on broken treaties. And so when we think about refusing to participate in that economic system, which is taxation for the U.S. government, it's really important to keep that in mind. I'm going to continue going here. And then I want to talk about what's happening here in Philadelphia and really highlight the work of the Philadelphia Coalition for Real Justice, which stands for Racial, economic, and legal justice. And so the Coalition for Real Justice has been in the city for a few years, and it came out of the murders of black folks in the street by police, both here in the city as well as all across the country. And again, this is every 28 hours a black person is murdered by the police, by vigilantes, or by private security. And this is really what was the birth of a movement called Black Lives Matter, the birth of movement here in Philly. And nothing is, even that is not new. The targeting and murdering of black people in this country has been from day one. What has changed is the ability for somebody to take their smartphone and record it and live stream it. And so, anyways, here in Philly, there's the movement, the Philly Coalition for Real Justice is a black-led coalition that is standing fiercely against white supremacy here in Philly, as well as building solidarity with movements all across the country and across the world. And the call that they really put out is to be ungovernable in 2017. And what that means is a refusal to be able to be governed by this white supremacist government. And so there's a few different pieces of what that means, but the campaign, there's a few different pieces to it. There's a campaign to take down the Frank Rizzo statue in Philadelphia. Frank Rizzo was police chief and also at one point the mayor. One of the kind of grounding racist institutions that we know of in Philadelphia really had Frank Rizzo at the center of it. They also want to end stop and frisk and mass incarceration, revitalize Philly's education system, end black displacement through gentrification, and end the militarization of black and brown communities locally and abroad. And the reason why I want to highlight the coalition's work is because they are building connections and solidarity in a way that needs to be happening right now. From day one, organizing here in Philadelphia, calling out violence against trans women, particularly black trans women, calling out the ways in which our education system has really been dismantled by the power structures here in the city. We've had dozens and dozens of school closures. There's a 20% illiteracy rate in the city right now. Building connections with Juntos, another organization that's fighting for migrant justice here in the city, and protecting the rights of immigrants. So working across what we would normally think of as identity lines, class lines, and really recognizing the need for shared struggle, while at the same time centering black leadership. And this is, I raise this up because as white folks, speaking for myself as a white person, we really haven't learned to do this. We know how to co-opt, we know how to take over, but for the most part, in terms of building solidarity, we have a lot to learn. And so this initiative really, it comes out of really needing to be building more solidarity. For myself, speaking as a white person, this initiative is really for all folks who are interested, and I'm going to get into it a little bit more, but really wanting to highlight the amazing, fierce organizing and solidarity that's happening here in Philadelphia. Now, all this is happening despite overt repression. And just at a march last week here in Philly that was led by the coalition, we were marching up Broad Street, which is the main corridor that goes south to north through the city, and stopping along the way, calling out the Department of Education, calling out gentrification at Temple University. And when we got to Temple University, which is really trying to take over North Philly, which is a predominantly black working class section of the city, we went into one of the buildings to talk with students. And the police that had been cordoning off the march the entire time began to attack the crowd, and particularly going after the black leadership of the march, and started beating people with batons, spraying all of us with pepper spray. And a few of the comrades who were arrested, mostly black folks, were charged with felony rioting. And this is something new that we're seeing under the Trump administration, and it hasn't been used in a while, either here in Philly or elsewhere. But since the inauguration, we're seeing increased repression of protest movements. And thinking about what happened in Washington, D.C. with the folks who were protesting there during the inauguration, also got felony rioting charges. Here in Philly now, we're facing comrades are facing felony rioting charges. And so what's happening is an attempt to go after particularly black leadership with increased repression and increased targeting. And so I want to highlight that as kind of what we are seeing as a ramping up of violence that was already in place, and an escalation under the Trump administration. At least that's what it appears to be so far. And yet, despite this repression, our movements, and particularly Philly Coalition, Black-led movement, is building these connections that need to be made, really lifting up these marginalized stories. And I, again, go back to Black Lives Matter, which was started by 3 black queer women, and from the beginning was calling out and talking about violence against LGBTQ folks, young people, black trans women, really about building solidarity. So anyways, I can go on. I don't want to go on too much about that, but it's important to highlight there. And here are some other photos from actions that have been here in Philly. This was from the Black Resistance March to the DNC, and really thinking about how both Democrats and Republicans have failed black people, brown people, indigenous people in this country. The legacies of violence are not, it's not a Republican issue. It is across the board. Another photo from the Black DNC March. And kind of the last note on this, if you haven't checked out the Movement for Black Lives policy platform, I would definitely suggest checking it out. The link is there at the bottom of the slide. And this is really exactly what I'm talking about, is that the Vision for Black Lives has put out a policy platform in 2016 that is all about building connections between movements, where black and brown people are at the center of a fierce resistance movement, and yet still working for liberation for everyone. So take it out, check it out online. Definitely worth reading. Has 6 different pieces: End the War on Black People, Reparations, Economic Justice, Community Control, Political Power, and Invest, Divest. And the reason why I'm talking about the policy platform, other than being one of the most fierce documents that we've seen in the past decade, calling for liberation and for justice, is that this is actually how this idea of tax redirection came about. And I want to focus on the Invest, Divest portion particularly. So last year, when it came out, the Invest, Divest portion of the policy platform calls for an immediate 50% cut in military spending, which would close 800 military bases around the world. The document has been described as arguably the most powerful anti-war document of the last decade. And it also calls for reallocation of funds from policing and incarceration to long-term safety strategies in our communities, particularly black communities. So this policy platform, started some conversations, and I was talking with folks who helped draft the policy platform, and I want to thank all of the folks who helped with their feedback and participation in the idea, including the members from the Philly Coalition for Real Justice, the Dream Defenders, which is based down in Florida, the War Resisters League, the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, Outreach Committee. And so these discussions started thinking about, okay, how can we be starting to enact a piece of this policy platform right now? And that tax resistance, the refusal to pay taxes to the federal government, and redirect that to organizing that's led, initially the idea was led by black people, that is a very radical idea right there. And reparations as a whole is a much bigger conversation, talking about federal spending, talking about how we need to be righting the wrongs for people who have been targeted by the state violence here and abroad throughout history. But that tax resistance and redirection can get at a piece of this policy platform right now. And so those conversations started to grow and grow and grow. And we ended up broadening it a little bit more, so that it's really about what makes sense in individual communities. You know, organizing in Philadelphia is not the same as organizing in San Diego or Eugene, Oregon. So it's really about what makes sense for one individual community. You know, for example, where I was raised in upstate New York, there's an indigenous struggle going on right now where the Cayuga Nation is fighting for sovereignty recognition. And I can go into that a little bit more if folks are interested, but that the organizing there is different than it is here. And so this is a chance for people to work with others in their community to support the struggles right there where they are that are led by Black folks, brown folks, and indigenous people. And so it doesn't make sense to have it be a top-down initiative, but really about people engaging with this idea where they are. And so I want to talk about how this initiative sits a little bit differently for white people than for people who are targeted by white supremacy. I'll start with folks who are targeted by white supremacy. And what comes to mind is this quote from the community of Beit Sahur in Palestine that had a tax resistance campaign in the late 80s and early 90s. And after folks in Beit Sahur unanimously decided to withhold taxes from the Israeli regime, they issued a statement. And this is a quote from that statement that goes, "We will not finance the bullets that kill our children, the growing number of prisons, the expenses of the occupying army." And so thinking about war tax resistance as a way to defund the systems that are oppressing Black folks, brown folks, and indigenous people. You know, it's a potential tool in the toolbox for those campaigns. You know, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's a potential tool in the toolbox. For white folks, you know, this is a chance for us, speaking as a white person here, to challenge our complicity with white supremacy and violence. And that's one of the ways in which we are asked to be part of this white supremacist system as white people, is to be ignorant, to not recognize its impacts, and to be complicit. That when our government is enacting white supremacist violence, that we are complicit and that we pay for it. And we don't question that. We don't question how we're complicit in that system. And what this effort really calls us to do as white folks is to redirect that resource that would have gone to the federal government to resistance that's led by Black folks, brown folks, indigenous brothers and sisters who are challenging that white supremacist system. So it sits a little bit differently depending on our identities, but I just wanted to talk about how there are kind of multiple elements here that people can think about. And I want to touch on the risks of this initiative. You know, if you are new to war tax resistance, I encourage you to check out our upcoming webinar on March 4th. It's going to go into full detail about the logistics of actually how you resist taxes, as well as the potential consequences and risks of that. But I also want to notice how even that idea of being able to take calculated risks is a privilege, and particularly a privilege of whiteness. Black folks, brown folks, indigenous folks get to think about the potential risks, but there are also just risks, period, of being targeted every single day by living in this country when you're Black, for example. The quote here is from an article that just came out about Black anti-fascist action and activism in New York City. And Trevor, who was quoted in the article, says, "Living as a Black person in America every day is an anti-fascist struggle. Any day you could end up on the plantation, which is the prison system. So every day is a war to some degree." So, that's, I guess, a caveat of what we think about with risks of tax resistance and redirection. And in particular, I just want to, for this presentation, want to say that there are very real risks, especially for folks who are thinking about citizenship. If you're undocumented, you're thinking about citizenship, one of the first things that they look at in terms of citizenship is paying taxes. So just want to highlight that. But if you want to look at more of the ins and outs of the actual resistance and the potential consequences, check out our webinar coming up on March 4th. Go on our website, and you can learn a lot more there. So the actual logistics of how do we do this redirection effort. So I had talked a little bit about it being a local effort. This is about you getting together with others in your area to think about how can we be more directly supporting Black, Brown, Indigenous resistance. And it looks different depending on where it is. So I'll talk about what's happening here in Philadelphia. These photos here are from workshops that we led here in the city in January, where it was co-hosted by 3 different organizations, by War Tax Resistors, the Coalition for Real Justice, and the Black and Brown Workers Collective. And it was all about tactics for racial justice. So thinking about war tax resistance in that light. How can war tax resistance be a tactic for racial justice? And it was a great presentation. And our focus here in the city is on redirecting to Black leadership, Black organizers who are working for liberation. In another community, it's going to look different. Out in San Diego, they're thinking about how do they support Latinx organizers in the city. So it really is about you working with others in your area to think about, all right, how can we lead this struggle and really support the organizing that's happening in our community. When I had talked with some other war tax resistors about this, one person in particular who's white said, I live in an all-white area. So there's not really organizing happening in my area that's led by Black folks, Indigenous folks. And what I thought about it for a little bit, and what I said to them was, well, why? What's that history that has led to that segregation? Because, where you live, there were Indigenous people who lived there. Just thinking about Indigenous people specifically who were forced out of that area. So what are those treaties that were broken? What is that history of genocide? And what's the tribe that was living there? And perhaps they have an active land claim. I'm thinking about where I grew up in upstate New York. There's an active land claim of the Cayuga Nation for land that of the 64,000 acres that the Cayuga Nation had originally as part, designated by the treaty. This is the Treaty of Canandaigua. The nation only has 70 acres now. And so there's a legacy of genocide that has resulted in white control and domination of that space that was illegally taken. And so what is that history, and how can you think about, it might mean building relationships with, in our case, in upstate New York, part of the Cayuga Nation is in Oklahoma. And that actually there's a potential to support that struggle, and it might mean that actually building relationships that are geographically very far away, because that's what white supremacy did, right, in that space. That's what genocide did in that space, is push Indigenous people, in this case the Cayuga Nation, and members of the Cayuga Nation, out of that space, and requiring them to leave their homeland in order to protect themselves and their families and their communities. So, and actually survive. So anyways, I offer that to say that for us, especially thinking about white communities here, that it really requires some unlearning of what we've been taught, right? Unlearning that, oh, this is just a white space. There's not any history of Indigenous struggle here. Unlearning some of those elements that have kind of taken over our lives and our communities, which is what white supremacy and colonization does. So anyways, let's go on to the next point here, which is ask. So that ask the leadership in your areas what would be useful. Don't presume to know. Here in Philly, it was very clear. The Coalition for Real Justice, Black and Brown Workers Collective said, great, if you want to redirect money that would have gone to the federal government to us, that would be awesome. And so that's kind of been our initiative here, but it might look different elsewhere. Other organizers in North Carolina, in Raleigh might be saying, we actually want y'all to spend some time. We need stuff drafted up for us. We need, it might mean redirecting time or, energy in different ways. So ask what would be useful. And this is, particularly in activist circles, there's the idea that, you can come in and you already kind of know the issues, but this is not the case here. And that's, I'd say, not the case in general. ask what would be useful to the organizers rather than presuming that you know. And that's really how we begin to build a more solidarity between movements. If we're thinking about how do we bridge some of these movements together, is ask what would be useful to this other struggle, and how can you begin to support that work, whether that's money, time, what have you. So that concludes. That's a very kind of brief and quick presentation around the redirection effort. If you have questions, we have about 20 minutes for questions. If you see we're going to start with the chat question. So if you want to put a question in the chat box, we can take those first, and then we're going to after the chat questions, if you hit the little hand button and raise your hand, then you can ask a question out loud as well. Any questions? All right, well, while we're waiting for questions here, I'll just say one more thing about this initiative, is that this is not a perfect initiative. This is about working around one specific piece that seems to make sense. It seems to make sense right now to be really supporting the leadership in our communities of Black organizers, brown organizers, Indigenous organizers that are leading fierce campaigns and resistance that need to be supported more, and that this act of refusing money to the federal government and redirecting that to those struggles is really a critical and beautiful act that we can be doing right now. So if this is a growing effort. So if you have feedback from your organizations, if you have feedback from your community, this is designed to be grown and designed to change. So please, provide as much feedback as you can on how this is going in your area. These links on the Q&A page here are for you to get involved a little bit more. Let's see here. This connects up to our, here we go. Yep, up to our webpage, where you can read more fully about the initiative. And if you want to get involved, you can go down to the bottom here and provide some information in this form about where you are, what group you're a part of, and who you're redirecting to. And that's really about the best way to get involved at this point with this initiative. If you want to be in contact with more folks in your area and get involved that way, you can go to our webpage, nwtrcc.org, and under Contact is Contacts and Counselors, and you can get in touch with other people in your area who have experience with war tax resistance and can provide, for many, many different communities here, all across the country, can provide more information and get you connected up with others in your area who might be interested. Oops. So again, if you want to ask a question, please go ahead and you can either type it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand here. All right, looks like we got a question.
How do folks feel about using Twitter to go viral with the campaign, like with a hashtag like "We Won't Pay"? Or is there already a hashtag associated with the effort?
There's not a hashtag so far, but I like the idea. And so I think that's a great one. We won't pay. I love that. So.
It's short, sweet.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, and we had some other questions here. Great. So there's a question about, I plan to include which Indigenous POC orgs I've donated to in my letter to the IRS explaining my resistance. Do you think that might be counterproductive by possibly drawing more state attention to those POC Indigenous orgs? I would say that yes, it actually might be counterproductive by raising more attention to those organizations. So I would, if you're going to write about it in your letter to the IRS, state it a little bit more broadly. You can say, I've donated it to organizations that are fighting white supremacy in these different ways, not actually mentioning the exact organizations. Just because we don't want to be bringing down additional targeting through this effort. Yep. And that's something that a lot of the organizations you could ask about. You can ask if they are okay with you publicizing this. Some might be okay with that, and some might not be. Yep. Great. There's a question, can you support a group that already raises reparations? A war tax resistor in San Diego did last year. Very grateful. Yep, I think that's a great avenue to go forward, to really highlight the work that's already happening around reparations. And this initiative can really be right in there with that. Yep. Somebody asked, will the 21 slides that I used today be available? And yes, it will be available. We're going to make the recording available online afterwards. And I'm also going to put my email address in the chat box here. And you can contact me by sending me an email, and then I can make this presentation available to folks afterwards. All right, additional questions here. Have there been any paradigm shifts or strategy shifts in war tax resistance following Trump's election and the administration's actions? So I would say that we have ramped up our efforts. These webinars are really about trying to get more and more people involved and informed about war tax resistance. We've seen a twofold increase in terms of people going to our website to get information. And so we're trying to ramp up how much work we've been doing in order to provide support to folks who are now interested. But in terms of our particular work, I'd say that this is a piece of that paradigm shift, is that more and more people are really wanting to be actively challenging white supremacist structures, and this initiative is a piece of how they can really begin to engage with that. So this is a small chunk of a paradigm shift, and hopefully it will continue to grow. Hopefully it will continue to grow how we are supporting other movements against state-sponsored violence and really building those connections. Thanks for your question. Is there any organized effort to not pay for the proposed alleged wall? Great question. If you go onto our website, hopefully y'all can see this, and you go to media and blog, there is a new blog entry that Erica, the social media person with us, did all about Trump's wall plans. And it talks about the existing border militarization, and as well as how the Trump administration is escalating the militarization at the border. And also, it goes into a little bit both the history, but also about how people can think about war tax resistance specifically because of the border. And we're hopefully going to be releasing shortly a form that people can submit to the IRS with their tax documentation, where it kind of outlines the percentage of the federal budget that would go to building the wall. And people, if they want to, can begin war tax resistance, specifically around that issue. That's one way that we are thinking about these different issues, is that actually calculating out how much of the federal budget goes to not only the military and the Pentagon, but specifically border militarization, money that goes to transferring equipment from the military to local police forces. These different issues that will hopefully get more people thinking about how they can be refusing taxes and seeing these connections. Another question here. I'm a trans woman of color who fears persecution by the state if I participate in war tax resistance. Are there things that I can do with little risk, or things that I should keep in mind as I ponder the possibility of being a war tax resistor? Great question. So in general, what we say is that the prosecution of war tax resistors has been relatively random. That said, as a whole, war tax resistors have been predominantly white. And so, in my mind, it seems pretty obvious that if this was an all-black organization talking about tax resistance, the level of repression would be dramatically different than what we are seeing. And so that, I think those are kind of two pieces to that question. I would say for you, the national network is about building solidarity and support for people who are war tax resistors, and really think about how we can all support each other as organizers and really be there for each other. So that anybody who wants to take on being a war tax resistor, that's our commitment, both as an organization and as a network, is showing up and supporting each other, period, and having each other's backs. That said, there are risks, and so I would say check out the upcoming webinar on March 4th about the possible consequences. In terms of the number of people who have faced any type of criminal action or actually going to jail for war tax resistance, the numbers are very, very low. We're talking 2 people in the past 80 years have gone to jail for war tax resistance out of hundreds of thousands. Actually, specifically for war tax resistance, there are people who have gone, for elements around fraud and stuff like that, and kind of subsequent charges. But actually, for war tax resistance and refusing to pay taxes, we're talking 2 people in the past 80 years and hundreds of thousands of people. The people who have faced criminal charges, we're talking less than 100 people over the past 80 years. So, in general, the IRS, and there's always the possibility that this will change. Especially under a new administration. But in general, the IRS wants its money. And so it uses other tactics to try and get money, such as bank seizures and going after people's pay. So you would have a potential lien on your paycheck that would come, siphon out a little bit to the IRS every month. That doesn't necessarily happen, but this is one of the tools that the IRS uses because they're mostly interested in getting money. And there are lots of ways that war tax resistors have figured out how to fight back against that and make it so that the IRS can't seize their money, as well as support people who have had their money seized. So there are alternative funds and there are penalty funds that support people who have had their money seized. So if you are a war tax resistor and you get fined $1,000 for being a war tax resistor with penalties and fees for not having paid taxes, the penalty fund will, you can apply to have that money reimburse you. So those are some of the resources that are available, but I would say that, especially with all of our identities, we need to be thinking about the risks that we take on. And as a trans person of color, already you are targeted by many different forms of oppression. And so, you get to think about whether or not this actually makes sense for you in your life and taking on additional risk. Yeah. Great question. All right, additional questions here. Anybody else want to ask a question out loud? You can raise your hand. Additional questions. I don't see any more questions. The person who talked about supporting reparations movement highlighted the Black Star Industries. It's out on the West Coast, so if you want to check that out, you can do so online. There's also somebody that asked about what are things that people can do with a smaller level of risk. And what I would say is to get involved, and that there's lots of ways to support people who are war tax resistors. And that it's not about necessarily everybody taking on this as a risk, but that for people who are interested in the redirection part of this component, you don't have to be resisting taxes to the federal government to redirect money. This effort is really about anybody who is interested in redirection to do so, and think about what are the organizations that are leading resistance work in your area that are led by particularly Black folks, brown folks, Indigenous people that you can support and really be supporting their work and highlighting their leadership. And so that is what this initiative is about, is backing that leadership, and it doesn't necessarily have to be resistance from money that was refused to the federal government. It can be money that you have, period. So that's just a little bit on that answer, is that this is open to everyone. You don't have to be a war tax resistor to participate. You can still get involved in redistributing resource. And also there's, just to put it out there, especially for indigenous land struggles, something to be thinking about is redistributing land. And this is not directly related to this initiative, but that there are many different First Nations that have put out a call for people to redistribute land to that First Nation. This is happening in upstate New York with the Hugo Nation that I talked about as well. So something to think about in terms of how do we redistribute resource across the board. Any other additional questions? You can either raise your hand or you can submit one in the chat box. All right, I don't see any hands raised or any additional questions. Thank you to everybody who came on the webinar today. It was great to be here with you. We'll make the recording available after the fact for you to use in your organizing in your communities, especially if you're thinking about leading this initiative in your local area. This recording is for you to use. And again, if you want the slides from today's presentation, please shoot me an email and I can get those to you as well. Again, I want to thank everybody who made this initiative possible. This couldn't have been a reality if it wasn't for the participation from many different groups, particularly folks who helped out with the Movement for Black Lives policy platform, the Dream Defenders, Philly Coalition for Real Justice, War Resisters League, as well as the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee's Outreach Committee. Thanks for all of your participation here today. It's an honor to be here with you. And before we end, there's one other person who raised their hand. And Star, go ahead. Can everyone hear you? I don't know if you're... All right, looks like... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I'm in San Diego. I'm the National Political Action Chair for the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. I'm the one who brought up reparations and Black Star Industries. They're based in St. Petersburg, Florida. You had said West Coast. And
oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the home of the African Revolution, and it's under the African People's Socialist Party. So thanks for bringing that in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Great. All right. That concludes the webinar for today, and thank you to everybody who came on. If you have any additional questions or want to get involved, you can go to the links that are on the last page here, and you can also contact me. You can reach out by way of email, and my phone number I will also post here if that is easier for folks. Feel free to give me a call as well. All right, thanks so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day.